We're going now. Melissa, thanks for joining. Appreciate you coming on.
Of course. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. So I'm going to ask you 10 questions, and we're going to get through them. I want to get your thoughts, insights on them. So excited to do that. Let's get started. What is your favorite movie and why?
My favorite movie for a while has been Lord of the Rings. I know it's not a movie, it's a series, but I think more than anything, it's an incredible depiction of what real friendship looks like, especially when you consider like how much Sam cares for Frodo and like looks after him regardless of the experiences that they go through. And of course, like appreciating the cinematics as well. So that is my favorite.
Interesting. So I mean, surprisingly, I haven't watched Lord of the Rings myself, so
Okay.
I should get on that. But so you're saying the whole point, like that whole relationship and interaction between, you said Sam and who was the other person?
Frodo?
Frodo. Yeah. So you appreciate that kind of like connection and the relationship. Yeah.
Mm,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Interesting. I'll definitely watch it. Um, what is one book that you would recommend to a friend or to a loved one?
I think, well, the one book I'm reading right now, which I have actually, is The Power of Habit. Have you read it before?
Okay. Okay. I haven't read it, but it's on my bucket list. I've heard like it's really good.
Yeah, it is. It's taken me a while to get through it just because like life and everything, but so from what I've read on it so far, it's been, excuse me, really insightful in terms of like recognizing that all of these things that we seem to do automatically are actually because of habits that we've built up automatically or maybe even unconsciously. And so I think reading this was really insightful in terms of recognizing that, okay, we do have control over how these things happen. For example, like even how we do things in the morning, like for example, do we brush our teeth before we eat or afterwards, and like what kind of caused that. And then also being able to, after recognizing and understanding and being aware that we have control over these habits, to kind of reconfigure them in a way that is helpful for us and our goals moving forward. So I think like right now, that is what I'm going through, and like I'm really liking it so far. So
Interesting. And you mentioned a good point. Sometimes, we're programmed even subconsciously to do some things that we don't even think about, whether
mhm,
they're good or bad. And it kind of helps to understand where they stem from. So you're
exactly.
able to kind of turn it around and form better habits, right?
For sure.
So how long does it take to form a new habit?
um Well, typically, people have always said that it's kind of like 28 days,
Yeah.
but I've also heard some experts on different podcasts say, like, ultimately, it's up to you and your consistency, right? So sometimes it might take shorter or longer, but I think it just depends on your lifestyle and like how dedicated someone might be to committing to change. And I think that's what's more important, right? Like, first recognizing, okay, that this is something I want to change, right? And
Mhm.
then being willing to put in the time and effort and consistency to make that happen.
Yeah, that's the key point is consistency. That's what it is, right? Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is your current ikigai?
So I actually had to look that one up because I didn't really know what that stood for, to be honest. But now I understand like it's your purpose in life.
Yeah,
And
it's like a Japanese term for like a reason for being, and it's just interesting because they went and they studied like people in Japan in this island. I forgot the name right now, and then also people in Sicily, and they were like, these guys are really living healthy lives. They're living to be 100, even over 100, some of them, and they were like kind of like trying to study why it is that way, and they realized these guys are living true to their ikigai, which is like the reason that they are here, right? The reason that they exist. So that's what it really means. It means a reason to be, you know?
yeah,
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah. So I learned a new term. So thank you for that. I appreciate
of
it.
course. So
But
what's your current ikigai?
yeah, it actually took me a while to kind of figure that out. I think a lot of self reflection is needed for that for sure. But I think what it comes down to for me is really helping other women rediscover their confidence and pursue their dreams. Because I feel like, at least based on my own experiences in my life, I feel like a lot of people have, or like I've been underestimated by a lot of people,
Hmm.
where, and I'm sure maybe like you've experienced this too, where people have said, okay, maybe you're dreaming too big, or this is unrealistic, like it doesn't make sense that you're doing this, why don't you do it this way instead?
Yeah.
Right? People kind of undermining your abilities in that sense. And so I feel like that's been a huge trend in my life, not just maybe because also like I'm a female, and maybe, you know, we have different experiences in that sense. But I think also due to the path that I might have chosen, like that's a lot of the responses that I've been receiving. And while for me, I've taken that kind of in stride and understood, okay, this is their perspective because they just have a different understanding of life and different goals. I think for some people, it might drive them the other way. And I've seen that in person where people have been so kind of battered down by the negative responses and feedback that they've received that they kind of lose faith and hope in not just themselves, but sometimes in other people or even in life, like worst case scenario, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I hope to, through the things that I'm doing and working on, to kind of encourage other women and let them know that, you know, they're not alone in this kind of situation, because that's the hardest thing, feeling like you're going through it alone and nobody really understands or shares in the experience. So helping them become aware that they do have a community behind them who understands and supports them, and then also kind of encouraging and building them up in that sense as well.
Good for you. Honestly, that's really important. And I have been following your like journey and your posts and the things that you actually do on social media. You're very active, always being very encouraging, but also very constructive in that sense of building that community, like you said, right? Because sometimes we don't even get that support that we need necessarily from our family or our friends. And that might lead us to kind of drive us into this lonely space where we start losing, you know, that spark or that fire that we have of doing something. And just because
Mhm.
people keep hammering down at us saying, oh, this is not possible and you're dreaming too big. And I totally get that for sure.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
that's what you're doing. That's cool. That's
Yeah,
cool.
it sounds
Very
like
noble.
you've been through a lot of stuff too. So
I mean, yeah, you always have this vision of yourself and what you want to do, and I think that it's very important that you either surround yourself with the right people or
mm,
um, strive to do that at least, right? Because if you don't, then that vision, that fire drive that you have is gonna kind of die out over time, and then you don't attain your potential, and that's scary, right?
mhm,
So definitely important to. I appreciate that sense of community that you also have in mind and that you keep close to you.
mhm.
Like that concept is very important.
Yeah, for sure.
Building a community of people who have similar vision, you know. So
Mhm.
good for
Yeah, and I think that's something that we often either take for granted while we're in it, or we don't realize that maybe this is playing such a huge part in our life if it's something negative, right? And I think, at least for me too, and this goes into some of our later questions, but I'll touch on it now, how like I think I was in a very negative environment for quite some time, in the sense that, like, not that it was intentional, but it's just some people have a very fixed perspective on things, and
you.
they have a very, like, it's more black and white, right? Like they see the world in a certain way and that's how it should be. And not that, you know, that's wrong or anything, but it's just some people also feel the need for everybody else to see it the same way, because that's part of what community is, right? Like bonding and encouraging each other through like common worldviews. And so because I happened to be a part of that kind of community and like grew up in it pretty much, that was kind of always impressed on me. And it, I think I didn't really realize until maybe like a year or two ago that the direction I wanted to go in life and the direction that they thought was best was very, very conflicting. And so, you know, sometimes you try to make it work, but if it's impossible, then it's probably healthier to kind of remove yourself from that so that you can grow and really flourish in the way that you feel called to.
100%. And, you know, you mentioned perspective. You know, obviously, I come from a very conservative background. You know, I'm not sure. Maybe you do as well. And like you
Mhm.
said, it's sometimes I have this quote on Facebook I wrote 2 weeks ago. It's like, if you stay stuck to your perspective, just one perspective, you're gonna die out. You know, it's like being a prisoner to only one perspective or a single perspective really leads you to die out as a person and the potential you have. So it does help to obviously understand who you are, but then try to see things from different perspectives, because that is what's going to help you grow, by putting on different lenses and
Mhm.
looking at people and people's lives and people's thoughts from their perspective as well. Um, anyways, that's very important, I think.
Yeah, and I think empathy comes into play there with what you're
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
because, right, like I think it's important to have values, right, and stand firm by them, right, because that's part of what integrity is and like having morals and things like that.
mhm,
But at the same time, being open to listening to and hearing from other people's perspectives, just as you were saying, right, because sometimes I think, especially myself when I was younger, I was always, because I grew up in that community, like very fixed on what was right and what was wrong.
yes, exactly.
And yeah, I think that made me like very, very close minded. Like I was a very different person when I was younger.
Mhm.
So being able to really like hear the other person and like respectfully disagree if you do, but also allowing those insights to really maybe like consider them in your mind and be open to the possibility that, you know, maybe sometimes you're wrong, or, you know, if the other person's wrong, then okay, disregard it. But sometimes I think we can learn so much from other people, and we shouldn't close ourselves off to that, because when we do that, exactly as you said, we close ourselves off from growth and from learning,
Yes, a
and then
lot.
we become stagnant. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think one of the keys to being able to be or have empathy, or one of the keys to being able to put on different lenses to see different perspectives, is first of all having that solid base and security in who you are,
Mhm.
because then you can leave your, let's say, so-called house or home and explore the wilderness, but then you always know that you can come back to that base, you know.
That's a really good analogy. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, right. Thanks.
Nice.
So okay, what new skills are you trying to learn?
I think based on everything that been saying too, I think like self-improvement, growing in awareness as well is like a lifelong process, right?
Mhm,
Like I think that's something that I'm always striving to work on.
mhm.
And obviously with new life experiences and different things that come up, different situations, we learn from those things as well. And I think it's always, as we were saying like this whole time, it's important to be open to those things, right? And not just being open, but also being aware when it happens, and being, how do I say it, like taking the time to reflect, and assess those situations, how it made us feel, what we want to take from it moving forward, and then how it can shape us into becoming the person we want to be.
Definitely. Just keeping an open mind and staying curious. That's also very important, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So, what is your biggest fear?
Um, my biggest fear is not being loved or accepted for who I am. And I think maybe some other people can relate to this as well, but I think our fears are, at least our biggest ones, are largely due to childhood experiences,
Mhm.
whether that be, you know, parents or friends or the community that we're part of. I think that really shapes who we become and also what we're most afraid of. And so for me, I think the reason why I fear like not being loved or accepted for who I am is because growing up as a kid, I always felt like I had to have everything together. So when I was young, we had like a pretty terrible car accident in my family,
Mm.
and I kind of had to assume the role of a parent and like almost take care of my younger brother in that sense. And because of that, I became very independent and somebody that others could rely on. And so when you kind of have that position, um, like I think there's a lot of pressure to kind of have everything together or always stay strong, because if you do, then sorry, if you're not strong, then you know what are other people going to do? So you kind of have to be that person for them, and not just that, but I think throughout my life, um, in my experience at least, like people have always kind of had comments on what I was doing, and not so much positive. It felt like they're always trying to change who I am or
Mhm.
like who I wanted to be. So that was everything from like even the way I dressed. So I grew up a tomboy, and when I was young too, people didn't like that. They thought I should, you know, be more ladylike,
Right.
wear skirts and dresses, etc. And then as I developed more of a fashion sense, it was the opposite. People were like, oh well, why are you always so like fashionable. Why can't you wear pants or something like that? Because at that time it was the opposite. I didn't really wear pants as much. So it kind of felt like that. And then even with like career, pursuing something that might be, not your 9 to 5, like more unconventional, people had stuff to say about that, and experiences as well. Like I think 2 years ago, I had a really negative experience, and the way that my community at the time responded to it was like I felt like my emotions and the way that I experienced that situation was deemed invalid. Like there was a lot of pressure to kind of forgive and have a relationship with this person again, when it was like a very how do I how would I say it? Almost like,
They almost disregarded
yeah,
your feelings and thought that the relationship is more important than what you're feeling, right? They
yeah, but
overlooked that.
yeah, not just that, like, I want to be like considerate of what I say here too, but at the time, like I felt really violated by this person's actions.
Mhm.
And the way that the community responded was, oh, well, you should also consider his reputation in the community. And, be aware that if you tell anybody about this, that, he might not feel welcome or anything. So it was more emphasis on, like maintaining the peace and making sure that, he felt okay to come back and things like that, which I understand. But at the same time, with everything going on too, it's not so much about like protecting reputation, but also, standing up for what is right.
Mhm.
And also if that was a very negative experience for somebody, not invalidating those feelings and making them feel like, even more isolated and alone than they do. So anyway, like all these experiences kind of contributed to the fact that, maybe when I put myself out there, when I am who I really am,
Mhm.
people might not accept me for that, or they might try to change me. And so that's something that I'm still working to overcome. And I think what's really helped is surrounding myself with people who really do understand. And like I have really great friends right now, and like they fully support me and encourage me and accept me no matter what. And that's something that I really appreciate and look for in other people as well.
That's really, really important, because again, going back to your examples of the way that you grew up or the places that you grew up, it's like if you were yourself, let's say, if speaking for myself, if I was myself, then it would be criticized in a certain way. And again, goes back to this thing that I said, if you narrow the area of exploration for children, they're going to grow up to be one dimensional.
Yeah.
Sometimes we create such a narrow path for people to walk in based on our own expectations. We're like, if you deviate slightly from this, then I'm going to come and say, no, you're doing this wrong, or I'm going to criticize you. And people always have something to say, they
Mm-hmm.
always have something to say. Um,
100%.
it does really put you in a lonely place where people don't accept you for who you are. So I can totally empathize with that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with your insecurities in that way then? Talking about fear. So how do you deal with your insecurities?
I think it's first being aware that this is happening. And I don't think sometimes we allow ourselves that opportunity to be aware unless we kind of, take some time away from the situation to reassess and reflect. So I
Mhm.
think that's really important. And something I've noticed that, maybe not a lot of people give themselves time to do is, like really sit alone with yourself and like process those experiences and those thoughts and those emotions, which is a really hard thing for people to do, right? Like nobody kind of wants to think back on something that was painful and have to, think, okay, well, what can I do about it, right? It's easier to sometimes like, you know, push it off or like ignore it, or sometimes even blame the other person, like, okay, that's just their problem, it's
Mhm.
not mine. But if we really do want to grow and, you know, kind of deal with these insecurities in a more positive and healthy way, and I think it's important to really set that time aside to be alone and like process it and like assess and reflect. And then first of all, like acknowledging, okay, yes, this happened, I have this insecurity, and like also recognizing where that stems from. Like, is it from something that happened to you with your family and friends, and is it still ongoing?
Mhm.
And thinking more constructively, like, okay, well, what can I do about the situation? Or being more prepared, like, okay, these are the things that kind of trigger this insecurity, and these are the feelings that come up. How can I handle it in a healthy and positive way that will help me grow as a person,
Right.
and then also help the other people around me be aware that these things are happening, right? Because sometimes people, they say things or do things unintentionally, and maybe we just take it the wrong way because we're more sensitive to those things, and they don't recognize it, right? So if that relationship is important to us, then maybe we should let that other person know as well, hey, like, this is going on, and so that they can be more aware moving forward, and maybe change some things as well. So it's like constantly building up and encouraging so that both people can learn and grow.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And like you said, acknowledging that's very important, right? Because if we don't understand where those feelings that are triggering us really stem from and don't acknowledge them to begin with, then we're just pushing them down, kind of suppressing them. But that
Mm.
won't help in the long run, right? Because it's a short term kind of like gain. Sure, you suppress it, but then it's gonna come back to haunt you again in the long run.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
like there was this analogy this psychologist was saying, if your insecurities are like a small dragon and you're like hiding them under your rug just
Hmm.
to not really like deal with them, eventually they're going to grow very big and destroy your house because they're small in the beginning, but then they'll get really big and you don't know what to do with it at that point.
Yeah.
So definitely important. So what are some red flags for you in relationships?
Do you know what's interesting about red flags? Like, I think that's a great question, because red flags often reveal way more about who we are as a person
Mhm.
than we realize. And equally, I think it's very fascinating that sometimes if you ask a friend, like, what you think my red flags are, it also says a lot about who they think you are as a person.
Hmm.
So that's also like very interesting. Um, but
Yes.
anyway, so sorry.
I said that no, that's a good point. Even asking people like what your blind spots or red flags are. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because recently I had an experience with that, and I think I didn't realize that um I think some of my friends, I thought they kind of knew me very well, but based on what they thought my red flags were, I was like, "Oh, well, maybe, I haven't talked about this with them, so they maybe didn't know that part of me as well as, I had thought." So that's something for me to do moving forward too, is like being more open about communicating those things versus, not
Yeah.
saying it and
Being
then
open to
expecting them to
feedback,
realize.
right?
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
So anyway, so for me, I have like 5 big things that I look for in a person. Personally, like, character is very, very important to me. It doesn't matter like how much money they have, what they look like, their status or their degrees or anything like that. I know that's important to some people,
Mhm.
but for me, I think first of all, like, if they aren't kind to other people, that's an immediate no for me. Second, I would probably say is authenticity, right? Like, um, are your words consistent with your actions, or like, is the person that you claim to be consistently showing up as the person you truly are,
Right.
right? And can I see that?
Hmm.
Um, and then third would probably be integrity,
Hmm.
and can I trust you, right? I think honesty is so important in any relationship. That's the foundation, to have trust, and not just like trusting somebody with your heart, but also, like, for example, in a relationship, with your emotions and with your thoughts as well. Can you feel free to share these things, and trust that that other person will protect them and not, use them against you or something like that.
Hmm.
And fourth would be, sorry, I wrote a note here just in case I forgot.
That's good.
um, how they respond when they're angry, and this says a lot more about a person's character than I think any other situation, right? Because it's easy to, be happy and positive and kind when things are going well, but when something triggers you, when something is very upsetting, or when things don't go your way, or you're just having a bad day in general, how do you respond um, to things that upset you, right?
Hmm.
Like, are you immediately angry and lash out, or do you kind of calm, are you like calm and patient, and or do you like remove yourself from the situation to give yourself a cool down time, or do you just like respond and react? So that's something that I look for as well, and just, anybody to see if that's a red flag or not for me.
Right.
And I think it's also like recognizing that these things are a choice too, right? Like how we respond when we're angry is still a choice. And how somebody chooses to respond in this situation says a lot about them too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Being able to understand how they are under moments of stress.
yeah.
Okay, so that was the fourth one. What about the last one?
The last one is similar values and goals in life.
Mm-hmm.
I think, a lot of it, people say a lot about like compatibility and chemistry and all these things, but I think ultimately, right, you want to strive to become the best version of yourself, and having somebody whose goals are aligned with that, who can also push you, and like vice versa, to become that person is like so important. I think one point of conflict in a lot of relationships is we sometimes try to change the other person, right? And or like believe that we can, right? Some of the negative habits that we see, or like
Yeah.
that we perceive to be negative, and think, oh, it would be so much better if this person did it this other way instead. And that's something that we also ourselves need to realize. We can't change somebody else. That's something that just a decision that they need to make. And we have to recognize, like, okay, if they never changed, like, are we okay with that? Because trying to get somebody else to change is also like a pretty selfish perspective, I'm realizing too, because then it's like expecting the other person to become the way that you want them to be versus accepting them for who they truly are, which at the end of the day, like, everybody wants to be loved and accepted, right? And so I think if you're to have a healthy relationship, that's something that you should both equally strive for and to do for each other.
These are very well thought out points. I mean, all of them are very important. Obviously, like starting with the basic stuff like integrity and having a character, being kind to people. But then also, like you said, important to understand how people are during stressful situations, because like life is not going to be all rainbows and sunshine all the time. So you want to kind of see how they are during those times of like distress, right?
100%.
And then obviously the values and these things are very important too, because at some point, there is going to come a time where having similar values is going to come very handy, coming super handy. So again, that's super important for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious to know what you think are some things that you look for yourself.
So for me, it's like these things are all same, like very similar, but then something else that I also think about is, okay, do I see myself sitting down with this person anywhere, like just me and that other person, having a conversation, like being able to conversate and share thoughts and ideas, for me personally is very important, because I'm like a person who thinks a lot, and I have a lot going on in my mind. And I always have this thing that where I want to express myself, whether that's through art, whether that's through a sort of a meaningful conversation or something like that. So if the other person is not receptive to that, or they're just not really that curious or that open-minded or that non-judgmental, then I wouldn't be able to operate on the same wavelength, you know?
Yeah. I think chemistry in that sense is really important, right? Like where you're able to connect on that kind of level. And I think no matter how much, some people might place an importance on compatibility, I think sometimes even more so chemistry is important, right? Like, can you just sit down and just like you were saying, right? Like, are you able to really connect with this person where you don't need all these external experiences to carry the relationship, right? Can you just simply be in their presence and share your thoughts and ideas and vision for the future and be inspired by that, right? Like, I think so like recently I got into a relationship, and what I realized for myself is something that I appreciate is like being able to do mundane things together, like just grocery shopping or cooking together, and still enjoying those moments and still
Yeah.
having fun with that person. That says so much more than having fun like going to an event, or you know going out and eating or something like that, right? Like it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Those things are fun, like you said. External stimuli, sure, it's fun, but then when you're simply there without any stimulus, how does that look like? And I think being with a person who's curious and open-minded, at least for me, that's very important, because having these two together obviously apart from the basics that we talked about, having these two together is like a very good combination to be able to constantly get to new heights and new levels.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Hmm.
So if you were to have lunch or dinner with someone dead or alive, who would it be?
Yeah. Um, it honestly took me a very long time to answer this question. I had to think about it for a while. Um, but I think this answer might change later on, but just
That's
temporarily.
cool.
I think probably Princess Diana,
Okay.
um, largely because I am very inspired by her humanitarian efforts,
Mhm.
and her heart and compassion for people. And I think one thing I would probably want to kind of pick her brain on is how she managed to kind of live her life under public scrutiny, because it's really difficult, especially with the fact that she was royal and those expectations and pressures along with everything else, right? Like it's difficult enough, I feel, having people assess your every move and criticize it, um, without even knowing you or your context,
Mhm.
right? But even more so, right? Like being in such a position of influence and authority in that sense, and those expectations. So it's like, I think I would be really curious to know like how she managed that, or like how she dealt with it, or what her process was like in terms of dealing with those expectations, or that criticism from other people, because it's really difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. Like sometimes we see people on social media or in the public eye, and it's really easy to judge, right? Because all their flaws are out there for everybody to see. But unless we're in their position, it's difficult to kind of understand like where they're coming from until we've kind of been in that same place. And yeah, also like just a side note, I also really admire her fashion sense, and the fact that, she, I think a lot of people might agree that she's the very definition of what it means to be a lady, like very classy and elegant, um, but also, very like up to date in terms of
Mhm.
style at that time.
Hey,
So
you know what? That's a really good answer because I can totally see you like vibing with Princess Diana, just connecting. Whether it's like you said on the fashion front or just like her personality. She's like the queen of people's hearts. She's
mm,
not just a queen, but just queen. She was a queen of people's hearts,
yeah.
and all the things that she went through. And not being accepted for who she is, and having to be a certain way just to fit this stereotype. And yeah, she had a lot of heat on her for being who she is. Definitely. So
Mm.
cool answer. What is the most important invention in your opinion in the past 15 years?
Um, Probably social media. Um, yeah, that's been huge. Obviously, like it's kind of taken over the world, and it was very like unexpected. But I think it's really cool that that happened, while we're alive, because I think. Sorry, when were you? What year were you born?
95.
Okay, same. Interesting. Okay,
Okay.
awesome. So then we kind of knew the world almost pre-internet-ish, right? Like
We're
we're
the
used
last
to that.
generation who actually didn't really grow up like engulfed by technology.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's honestly so like almost like a privilege, that we're able to kind of see that difference. Um, what life was like before and then after, and then also realizing like the impact the internet has had on such a global scale. And I think what's really fascinating about social media, and like obviously like there are positives and negatives about it for sure, um, but that it's created so much opportunity in so many different fields, right? But not just that, I think it's encouraged more people to be creative and express themselves in different ways where those platforms didn't previously exist. So I think a lot of times, when people were to express their creativity, maybe um, because it wasn't so like widely known, maybe people were slower to share those things. But now that it's kind of rampant all over the world, people are recognizing, oh hey, like there's so many opportunities for me to be creative and everyone else is doing it. So now there's more freedom for individuals to share and express, um, their interests and their vision in different ways. And I think what's really awesome is how we're moving towards a more digital age, and remote work is becoming more popular.
Mhm.
And I think that's awesome, because I think, well, there's like a lot of debate on this, so that this is just my personal opinion, but I think a lot of people, with the way that we've grown up in society and the way that culture has kind of shaped us, at least in the North American perspective, is that, sometimes there's a bit of an unhealthy balance between work and life, right? And that, like, obviously, I think it depends on how important these things are to you. Like, at least for me personally, like, I'm more of a workaholic, but I think there's a way to kind of go about it in a way that's healthy and, builds you up versus like being, I don't know, like almost stuck in a mindset that you always have to do things like a certain way, or that you have to work X amount of hours or earn X amount of money in order to be successful. And I think in that way, like being able to kind of work from home and have those opportunities through digitization, et cetera, has helped a lot of people realize, like, especially with COVID, that, you know, relationships are important too, and like self-development and growth and spending time with the people that matter to you and doing the things that matter as well. It's not always like, I think before the virus, like, I think that's one of the biggest things for me that I find that was really beneficial or helpful about this whole thing happening was that a lot of people were kind of just going about the motions of just, like work, home, kind of living for the weekend almost, and not really taking the time to really reassess, like, okay, is this actually what I want from life? And just, kind of doing what was expected of them. And I think this has kind of helped everybody slow down and realize, oh, hey, like, what is really important to me in my life, right?
Right.
Like, and yeah, like realizing, health is important, relationships are important, like family and friends and things like that. And like, obviously work is too, if that's what you're passionate about and what you love, but also equally, investing time in the other things that matter as well.
See, so I mean, you mentioned some good points there. Like, I think social media is definitely a very impactful invention of the past 15 years, and it's
Mhm.
been very widespread in society. I'm stuck in this dilemma, basically, social dilemma, right? Have you watched that, by the way?
It's on my list. I was going to watch that next, actually.
Definitely watch it. I'm stuck in this dilemma because for me, social media is a double-edged sword. So
Mhm.
if you are able to use it to your benefit, to your advantage, and to the advantage of those around you, spreading your word, spreading your vision, your art, your craft, connecting with people, that's the bright side of social media. And then there's also that other side where we get stuck in these vicious cycles, at least personally for me, uh, looking at other people's lives, comparing yourself, being kind of like uh, maybe sometimes even depressed, thinking maybe you're not good enough or your life is kind of mundane compared to other people, and then just constantly having like our phone in our hands and checking to see what's up, who's doing what. And if you're not stuck in that kind of hole or loop, then definitely I think social media is a platform for you to scale your vision, your business, and move forward, right? And like you mentioned, people are starting to discover a lot more about themselves. And one of my friends, he was like, we're at a renaissance age again because we're not like just one person. We're not just doing one thing. We can do many things. You can be an engineer, you can be an artist, you can be a podcast host, like so many things, right? So that's definitely thanks to social media.
Yeah. I think that's a great thing that we're moving towards, right? Because I think for the past while,
Mm-hmm.
can't really say how many decades, 'cause I'm not very sure, but everybody was kind of focused on more of a singular focus, right? Like, I'm sure you've got this feedback too that we were mentioning before, how everybody was just saying like, okay, well, maybe you should focus on one thing, or you're doing so many things, you just pick one, right?
Yeah,
Because that's
yeah,
what made sense back then. But I think it's great that we're moving towards like more of a multifaceted thing, because humans, I believe, are like very capable of doing multiple things, but we've kind of limited ourselves in that sense, right? So we should equally also like allow ourselves those opportunities to grow and become skilled in many areas because we're capable of it, you
yeah.
know so I think that's like awesome that we're moving towards that. um there was there's another thing that you mentioned that I wanted to touch on, but I can't remember right now, so if I do, I'll like come
Is it
back to
like the double-edged sword, the
it. Yes.
comparing yourself to other people?
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
um yeah, I definitely understand that, and I think that's why it's great that I've seen some people move towards like a more authentic conversation, or like unedited photos and things like that. And that's really hard to do, right? Like I think people are so used to this idea of that success or happiness looks a certain way, right? And because culturally, like we've grown up with this norm that that's what it looks like, and we post it everywhere, that everybody thinks that, okay, well, if I don't do that, then, you know, I'm not going to be accepted or loved for who I am, or like I'm not going to be successful. And I think that's something that, you know, both you and I too can start by changing the conversation, which we are doing here, right? So that's like fantastic. But also, I think it's great, like seeing other people use their platform to share this kind of message, because it's so important. And so hopefully, right, like that grows and continues to expand moving forward. But ultimately, like it starts with ourselves. And like I think this conversation also is like a great starting point to do
For
that.
sure, no, I agree, and you know, it's important to spread the message and make sure people understand as well. I'm sure many people know, and then those who don't, you know, it's just important to share these messages, these insights, because then people will feel like they're not alone either. You know, they have similar thoughts, and it's fine. And you know, anyways, I think it's important. So writing off the last questions, Wave, what are you excited about in the future? So what about the future excites
Mhm. I think it's the fact that there's so much endless possibility. Like if you just look at what we've done as, you know, like humans in the past century,
you? Hmm.
there's so many things that have come to fruition that we never thought would have existed, right? So I think it's just, I don't know, like potential excites me,
Yeah.
not just for like humanity or the world, but also as individuals, right? Like things like, again, back to the internet, that's paved a way for so many different things to happen that we didn't think were possible. And I think it's just being open to like any opportunities that come your way, and like assessing, okay, like is this the right fit for me, and do I want to take it? But also understanding the fact that, you know, anything can happen,
Yeah.
and being receptive to that too. Like that's super super exciting to me, the fact that like we can do or be anything,
Hmm.
and that's becoming more um, accepted in society. That's amazing. So
Yeah, yeah, and staying open to those opportunities, you know, not thinking in one single dimension. That's going to allow you to be exposed to these opportunities and then take advantage of them and, you know, hopefully reach that potential that you were talking about.
yeah, exactly.
So, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I'm curious to know like what drives you or what you're most passionate about.
What drives me? What drives me is getting to a place where I'm capable of helping uh, those that I love and the people around me. So what motivates me most is basically like my community. You know, that's the single most important thing to me. My family, my friends, my circle. You know, and then you keep extending that, whatever the definition of community means. At some point, it can even mean the entire world, right? But what drives me is being capable of helping people, you know, whatever way that means, whether it's monetarily, whether it's spiritually, whether it's mentally, whatever, you know, just getting to a place where I'm certain that I can help people, because I think in that way, even when I'm gone, they're gonna pass the mantle forward in some way. So that's the main thing for me.
Yeah. What's your vision for the future in that sense? Like where do you kind of what are you kind of working towards, if you're open to sharing that?
Of course, no, I'm open to sharing that. It's just that it's not a fixed thing right now. Obviously, like I graduated, I'm working as a consultant right now. I'm in a corporate world. Not gonna stay there for a lot of time, but right now I'm just gaining that experience. And then
Mhm.
on the side, I'm doing my own thing, you know, with art. I'm drawing, I'm writing, I'm
Mhm.
trying out different ways of expressing myself. And then, you know, after that, looking to start my own thing, and
Mhm.
from there, you know, other opportunities are gonna, you know, pop out. But the main thing for me is, like, if you were to ask me where do you want to be in 10 years, I may not have a specific answer, but I do know I want to get to a place where I'm constantly growing and learning through being open-minded and curious, and meeting different people, having interesting conversations, and
Mhm.
just one by one changing or affecting people's lives in that way. Um, but if you were to like ask me, is there a specific, let's say, business that you want to have or grow? At this point, I'm still really figuring that out. Like I'm writing things down, I'm reading, looking for inspiration in different places, looking at where something might spark some sort of, a thought or an idea.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm still on that road.
Yeah. That's awesome though. Like honestly enjoy that because life is a process,
Hmm.
right? Like no two paths look the same.
Hmm.
Um, and it looks different for everybody, right? Like some people, I think they're able to, through different life circumstances, come to that realization very early on. And then for some people, they don't realize that until their 60s maybe, but that's still great because they came to that realization and understanding versus like not ever, right?
For
So
sure. For sure.
I think it's yeah, like it's super important to also be patient with ourselves and like give ourselves like that grace too, right? Like an understanding that sometimes these things take time and it's hard sometimes because you kind of want to get there and
Yeah.
make that impact already,
Hmm.
right? Because you're just so passionate about it. But I think it's equally important to allow yourself to go through that process and yeah, like definitely I think there are things that we can work towards in terms of like having some goals, right? Because then that gives us purpose in waking up every day and things like that.
Yeah.
But also equally being flexible with those goals and understanding that, things might change or something might happen in our life that we never expected. And maybe things look different now and being okay with that as well.
Yeah, definitely. You can keep a long-term vision, but then you can kind of pivot on your goals, right? Like
Yeah.
one of the reasons I started this, like let's say project is to get people's kind of thought processes, their insights, how they think. That's really important for me, right? Like being able to tap into people's minds as well, because we don't get to like share our thoughts on a daily basis where all of us are busy working or basically doing our own day-to-day things, right?
Mhm.
So that's also something that's very important. And like you said, it's a process. If you set goals for yourself and actually achieve them, I realize it's not about the final destination that you achieve, like that goal or whatever. It's
Mhm.
who you become and the things that you're learning along the way that really matters. So that's also something that's good to think about that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And like I love that you started this podcast because it's such a great way to connect with people and also, share your experiences and things that we've learned. And obviously like we don't know everything. Like I have so much more to learn and so much that I don't know.
Mhm.
But it's about again, like as you were saying, like staying curious and being open to different perspectives and learning from other people's experiences who are different from ours. And sometimes we might never go through those things, so how do we know unless somebody shared them? So
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, and I think it's great because it also creates more of a culture of empathy and understanding versus just judging automatically, which is so much easier to do. But um also like you know, we also don't really like it when it happens to us. So equally, we should share that kind of grace with other people too, right? In the sense where we should, try to understand where they're coming from first, and then afterwards, like trying to work things out that way. So honestly, this is like amazing that you started this podcast. And like, yeah, like I wish you all the best for the future and everything. And I'm
Thank you.
excited to
Thanks
watch
for
and see where this goes.
Oh, definitely. Thanks for coming on. It was really good chatting with you. Always I'm following your journey as well. So keep on doing what you're doing, and thanks for taking the time to do this as well.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.